"Get off my lake now, or I'm calling the cops." The HOA president was screaming at me from my own cabin deck. This psycho Karen demanded I leave my lakeside property because she claimed she owned the entire lake. When I refused to budge, she actually dialed 911 on me. The police officer who showed up looked at her like she was completely insane. Who calls cops on someone standing on their own property? But what I discovered about this land would make Karen wish she had never messed with me. Let me tell you how this insane situation got flipped completely upside down. Echo stories? Family? Drop a comment if you've survived a neighbor this crazy. Let me tell you about the day my peaceful retirement turned into the wildest property dispute you've ever heard. I'm Marcus Thompson, and at 45, I thought I had seen everything during my 20 years as a corporate lawyer. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened when I bought a simple lakeside cabin just to fish and forget about the legal world forever. I found this place through an estate sale, tucked away on what I thought was a quiet lake where nobody would bother me. The whole point was to escape the drama, the deadlines, the constant fighting over contracts and corporate nonsense. All I wanted was to wake up, make coffee, and cast a line into peaceful water. But apparently, the universe had other plans for me. It was a Tuesday morning in early May, and I was sitting on my little wooden dock with my coffee and a simple fishing rod, watching the sunrise paint the lake in these gorgeous gold and orange streaks. The water was like glass, not another soul in sight. Exactly the kind of morning I dreamed about during all those late nights and stuffy conference rooms. I'm thinking to myself, this is it, Marcus. This is what happiness feels like. I cast my line and settled back, already planning to make this my daily ritual. The stress from years of corporate battles was finally starting to melt away. And for the first time in decades, I felt genuinely at peace. Then I hear this car engine roaring up the gravel road behind my cabin. And I'm talking about an aggressive, angry kind of driving that immediately puts you on edge. Before I can even turn around, this white BMW comes screeching to a halt right behind my cabin, and out steps this woman who looks like she was born to demand to speak to managers. Blonde bob haircut, perfectly pressed outfit, and this expression on her face like she just caught me stealing from a charity fund. She starts marching toward my dock like she owns the place, and I'm thinking, oh great, here comes trouble. But I'm trying to stay calm. You know, I came here for peace, not conflict. Excuse me, she shouts from about 50 feet away, her voice carrying across the water like a foghorn. This is a private community lake. You cannot fish here. I turn around, still holding my coffee, and I'm looking at this woman who's practically vibrating with indignation. She's pointing at me like I'm some kind of criminal, and I realize she's completely serious. This isn't a joke or a misunderstanding. This woman genuinely believes she has the authority to kick me off my own property. I sat down my coffee and stood up, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. Ma'am, I'm fishing from my property shoreline. I own this cabin and the land it sits on. But she's not having any of it. No, she screams. Actually screams like a toddler throwing a tantrum. I'm Victoria Hayes, president of the Homeowners Association. I control all lake access. This is exclusive community property. She pulls out her phone and starts recording me, which honestly just makes the whole situation even more surreal. Here I am, a grown man trying to fish in peace, and this woman is treating me like I'm some kind of public menace. I'm documenting this violation for legal action, she announces. Like she's conducting some kind of official investigation. The whole thing would be hilarious if it weren't so completely insane. That's when she really loses it and makes the call that changed everything. She dials 911 right there in front of me, and I hear her telling the dispatcher, I need police immediately. There's a trespasser refusing to leave our exclusive community amenity. The dispatcher asks if anyone's in danger. And Victoria, because that's what she told me her name was, Victoria shouts back, he's destroying our property values. Send someone now. I'm standing there with my fishing rod watching this woman have a complete meltdown. because I'm fishing from my own dock on my own property. She's filming me while she's on the phone, and she keeps saying things like, I built this community from nothing. I deserve respect. The really crazy part is how calm I stayed through all of this. 20 years of dealing with hostile negotiations and corporate drama had taught me to keep my cool under pressure. But this was something else entirely. This woman was so convinced she was right, so absolutely certain that she had the authority to control a lake that I was pretty sure was a public waterway anyway. I just kept fishing, occasionally glancing back at her as she paced around my property like she owned it, muttering about property values and community standards. Part of me wanted to laugh, but another part of me was genuinely curious about what kind of authority she thought she had. I mean, I've dealt with plenty of people who overestimate their power, but this was next level. When the police officer finally showed up about 20 minutes later, I had to admit I was curious to see how this would play out. It was a young guy, probably mid-20s, and he looked about as confused as I felt. Victoria immediately pounced on him, waving her phone around and showing him videos she'd taken of me fishing. Officer, this man is trespassing on private community property. He's violating our homeowners association rules. The officer looked at me, then at her, then back at me, and I could see him trying to figure out what exactly was going on. I handed him my property deed and my fishing license, staying calm and polite. Officer, I'm fishing from my own property. I bought this cabin 3 months ago, and as far as I know, the lake access has always been open to residents. The officer spent a few minutes looking at both our documents, and I could see him getting more confused by the minute. Victoria had these official-looking HOA papers, and I had my legitimate property deed. And there was clearly some kind of boundary dispute happening that was way above his pay grade. Finally, he hands everything back and says, "This looks like a property dispute, which is a civil matter. I can't arrest anyone for fishing from their own property, but you folks need to work this out between yourselves." Victoria's face goes bright red, and she starts sputtering about how this is unacceptable, and she's going to call the county and demand action. The officer just shrugs and drives away, leaving me alone with this furious woman. After the cop left, I went back inside to clean up the cabin and try to process what had just happened. That's when I found something that would change everything. Though I didn't know it at the time, I was going through an old trunk in the bedroom closet, stuff the previous owners had left behind, and I found these family photos and documents. Most of it was just old family pictures and letters. But there was this one faded letter that caught my attention. It mentioned the Thompson property and had what looked like part of an old map attached to it. The map was mostly unreadable, but I could make out what looked like a large piece of land with a lake in the middle of it. I'm looking at this thing thinking, Thompson, that's my family name. My great-great-grandfather lived somewhere around here, but honestly, I figured it was just family history stuff. Not anything important. Meanwhile, Victoria had gone back to her car, but she wasn't done with me. She came back with this stack of official-looking notices and started taping them to my door. "Cease and desist all lake activities immediately," she yells. $50,000 fine for continued violations. I'm watching her through my window, and I'm thinking this woman has completely lost her mind. But then Gary, my next-door neighbor, comes walking over looking really uncomfortable. He's this middle-aged guy, seems pretty normal, and he's been friendly since I moved in. But today, he looks stressed out, and he says something that makes my blood run cold. "Marcus, I need to tell you something. Victoria's been telling all the new buyers that this whole area is going private. She's saying she controls the development rights for about 200 acres around here." That's when I'm staring at this faded map fragment in my hands, and I'm thinking, could this old family letter be worth more than just memories? What would you do if you found mysterious family documents that might change everything? Drop your thoughts below. The next morning, I woke up to find another stack of official-looking papers taped to my door. This time, Victoria had called an emergency homeowners association meeting with only 48 hours' notice. The document claimed that immediate action was needed to preserve exclusive community amenities and that all residents were required to attend. I'm reading this thing over my coffee, and my lawyer brain is already spotting problems. First of all, 48 hours isn't enough notice for any legitimate HOA meeting. Second, the language is way too vague and threatening. But what really got my attention was the small print at the bottom. Apparently, this meeting was being held to vote on immediate lake access restrictions for non-compliant residents. Yeah, that would be me. I decided to attend this meeting, partly out of curiosity, and partly because I wanted to see exactly what kind of authority Victoria thought she had. The meeting was held at the community center, and when I walked in, I counted exactly 8 people in a room that could hold 50. 8 people, including Victoria, are trying to make decisions for an entire neighborhood. Victoria had set up this whole PowerPoint presentation called Unauthorized Lake Activities Threat Assessment. And I kid you not, she had secretly taken photos of me fishing and turned them into some kind of criminal evidence. She's clicking through these slides, talking about how my unauthorized activities were setting a dangerous precedent that would cause property values to crash. The whole thing was so over the top that I almost started laughing. But then she gets to the vote. And that's when I realized how serious this situation really was. All in favor of immediate lake access restrictions for non-compliant residents, she announces, and 6 out of 8 hands go up. Just like that, according to Victoria. I was banned from the lake. The problem is, I know enough about HOA law to know that you need a quorum for any legitimate vote. And 8 people out of 50 residents definitely doesn't qualify. But Victoria is acting like this is completely legitimate. Writing up official-looking documents and talking about enforcement procedures, I'm sitting there thinking, this woman is either completely delusional or she's running some kind of scam. You know what really messed with my head? I started questioning my own sanity. Have you ever had someone gaslight you so hard that you actually wondered if you were the crazy one? I'm looking at my property deed, then at her fake documents, thinking, maybe I missed something when I bought this place. That's the power of a true manipulator. They make you doubt your own reality. I caught myself Googling how to tell if HOA documents are legitimate at 2 in the morning like some kind of paranoid conspiracy theorist. That's when my neighbor Gary approached me after the meeting, and what he told me made everything click into place. Gary looked absolutely miserable, and he kept looking around like he was afraid someone would hear him. Finally, he says, "Marcus, I'm really sorry, but I need to tell you something. Victoria offered me $5,000 to testify against you at the next meeting." So, I'm staring at him trying to process what he just said, and he continues, "My wife Sarah has cancer, and the medical bills are crushing us. I hate doing this, but we're desperate. Victoria says you're hurting property values, and that supporting the lake restrictions is the right thing to do for the community." The poor guy looks like he's about to cry, and I realize that Victoria isn't just delusional. She's actively buying votes and manipulating people. But that's not even the worst part. Over the next few days, Victoria launched this full-scale harassment campaign that was honestly impressive in its scope and intensity. She had these official notices printed up, claiming I owed $50,000 in fines for continued violations of community standards. She posted about me on community social media, calling me a problem resident who was destroying neighborhood harmony. She even hired private security guards to patrol the lake and tell people that fishing was no longer allowed without proper authorization. I'm watching these guys in uniforms walking around a public waterway, and I'm thinking, this woman has completely lost her mind. The security guards were the final straw for me. When some rent-a-cop tells me I can't fish from my own property because the owner says so, that's when my legal training really kicked in. I went back inside and started pulling out my old law books, researching HOA regulations and property law. What I found was exactly what I expected. Victoria's emergency meeting was completely invalid because it didn't meet the quorum requirements. According to the actual HOA bylaws, you need at least 25 residents present for any legitimate vote, and she had 8. Everything she'd done was legally meaningless. But more importantly, I realized that the HOA had never actually had any legal authority over lake access in the first place. That's when I started digging deeper into the property records. And that's when I found the census record that changed everything. I'm scrolling through online databases, researching my family history, and I find this listing from 1847, Thompson, landowner, 800 acres, 800 acres. I'm staring at this computer screen, trying to wrap my head around what that means. That's not just a house and a yard. That's a massive piece of property that would include the entire lake and most of the surrounding neighborhood. I'm thinking about that faded map fragment I found, and suddenly it's starting to make sense. But I needed to be sure, so I called a genealogy expert. The expert I hired was this elderly woman who specialized in historical property records, and she was absolutely fascinated by what I'd found. She told me it would take a few weeks to verify everything, but the initial research was promising. Apparently, the Thompson family had owned a huge tract of land in this area dating back to the 1800s, and there was a good chance that the property had been divided for tax purposes but never legally subdivided. That would mean the original deed might still be valid, which would mean I could potentially own hundreds of acres without even knowing it. It sounds crazy, but she'd seen similar cases before, especially with older properties that had been in families for generations. While I was waiting for the genealogy expert to finish her research, I started looking into Victoria's background, and what I found was disturbing. She had these secret contracts with a small local development company, and she was promising them private lake access and exclusive development rights for a project that would bring her a $1 million commission. The problem was, she was selling rights that she didn't actually own. She was telling the developer that she could remove problem residents and deliver a private lake for their luxury resort project. Meanwhile, she was telling new home buyers that they were purchasing exclusive lake access properties and charging them premium prices for that privilege. The woman was running a full-scale real estate fraud operation. The really crazy part was how confident she was that she could pull this off. She had convinced herself that she had the legal authority to control the lake, and she was using that fake authority to make deals worth millions of dollars. But what she didn't know was that I was quietly building a case against her, documenting every fraudulent claim and every illegal contract. 3 weeks later, when my genealogy expert called me back, her voice was shaking with excitement. "Marcus," she said, "the Thompson family deed was never properly divided. Based on my research, you might own the entire original property. But Marcus has no idea what Victoria is planning while he waits for confirmation." Echo Stories community, what's your craziest neighbor story? 3 weeks of waiting for property verification felt like the longest 3 weeks of my life. Every morning, I'd wake up and check my phone, hoping for that call from the county records office. Meanwhile, Victoria was getting more aggressive by the day. She'd hired contractors to start community improvements around the lake, which basically meant she was trying to physically alter the landscape to support her claims of private ownership. I'm watching bulldozers and construction equipment showing up, and I'm thinking, this woman is either completely insane or she knows something I don't. But when that call finally came from the county clerk, everything changed. "Mr. Thompson," the voice on the other end said, "I've reviewed all the historical documents with our legal team. The Thompson family deed from 1847 is still legally valid, and it was never properly subdivided. Based on our analysis, you appear to own approximately 800 acres, including the entire lake area, most of the surrounding residential community, and the land where Ms. Hayes is currently conducting her development activities." I had to sit down when I heard that. 800 acres, that's not just a big backyard, that's an entire community. I owned the lake, I owned most of the houses around it. I owned the land where Victoria was building her illegal development, and I owned the property where Victoria's own house sits. The irony wasn't lost on me that the woman who'd been threatening to fine me $50,000 for fishing was actually living on my land without permission. But with great power comes great responsibility, and I realized I had a huge decision to make. I could become a landlord overnight, collecting rent from dozens of families and potentially evicting anyone I didn't like. Or I could figure out a way to use this discovery to protect the community from Victoria's fraud while doing the right thing for everyone involved. First thing I did was call Gary because I felt terrible about the position Victoria had put him in. When I explained the situation, the poor guy broke down crying. "Marcus, I can't take her money," he said. "I found out she's been lying to everyone, including the developer. She's been promising them things she doesn't actually have the right to deliver. My wife's cancer treatment is expensive, but I can't be part of this fraud." That's when I realized that Gary wasn't just a victim of Victoria's bribery. He was a decent guy who'd been backed into a corner by medical bills and a manipulative sociopath. I told him I'd help him figure out the situation with his wife's medical expenses. But first, we needed to stop Victoria before she destroyed any more lives. But Victoria wasn't going down without a fight. Somehow, she'd gotten wind of my research, and she was accelerating her timeline for the development project. She started bulldozing areas around the lake, claiming she was making emergency community improvements to prevent environmental damage. In reality, she was trying to create facts on the ground, making physical changes to the property that would support her claims of ownership and development rights. She was also becoming increasingly paranoid, convinced that everyone was conspiring against her. Here's what nobody tells you about dealing with someone who's completely lost touch with reality. It's exhausting. I mean, physically, mentally, and emotionally draining every day. Wondering what fresh hell she'd cook up next? Would it be more fake notices? More security guards? Maybe she'd start claiming I was running a meth lab out of my cabin. The unpredictability was killing me. It was like living in a psychological thriller where the villain had a homeowners association handbook. I'd see her driving around the neighborhood at all hours, taking photos of people's houses, and confronting residents about their loyalty to the community. The breaking point came when I called a legitimate homeowners association meeting. I sent proper legal notices to all 50 residents, giving them the required advance notice and explaining that we needed to address serious concerns about recent HOA activities. 45 people showed up, which was the largest turnout in the community's history. The room was packed with angry residents who were finally learning about what Victoria had been doing in their name. I started by presenting evidence of the invalid emergency meeting, showing how Victoria had violated the HOA's own bylaws by holding votes without a proper quorum. But then Gary stood up and dropped the real bombshell. Victoria offered me $5,000 to lie about Marcus, Gary announced to the packed room. She wanted me to testify that he was hurting property values and that the lake restrictions were necessary for community safety. You could hear a pin drop in that room. Gary was shaking, but he continued, "My wife has cancer, and we're struggling with medical bills, but I can't be part of this fraud. Victoria's been lying to all of us." Then he played the recordings he'd made of his conversations with Victoria, where she clearly outlined her plan to manipulate the HOA vote and push through her development project without proper authorization. The room erupted in angry voices, with residents shouting questions and demanding answers. But Victoria wasn't done yet. She stood up and launched into this incredible meltdown that I'll never forget. "This is a conspiracy," she screamed, pointing at me and Gary. "You're all trying to destroy me. I built this community from nothing. I've worked for years to increase property values and create something special here." She was red-faced and shaking, completely losing control in front of the entire neighborhood. "Those documents are fake, that man," she pointed at me, "is just a troublemaker who wants to ruin everything we've built." The residents were staring at her in shock, watching their HOA president have a complete public breakdown, but I hadn't even revealed the biggest secret yet. Finally, when the room calmed down a bit, I stood up and said the words that changed everything. "There's something else you all need to know," I announced, feeling the weight of 45 pairs of eyes on me. Something about who actually owns this land. The room went dead silent. Victoria's face went pale, and I could see the fear in her eyes. She knew something big was coming, but she didn't know what. I've spent the last 3 weeks working with genealogy experts and county records officials, and I've discovered that my family's original property deed from 1847 is still legally valid. That deed covers this entire area. The gasps and murmurs from the crowd were immediate, but I wasn't finished. Which means that not only do I own the lake that Victoria has been trying to control, but I also own most of the land in this community, including the area where she's been conducting her illegal development project. What Marcus is about to reveal will change everything. But will it destroy the community or save it? Have you ever discovered something that completely changed your perspective? Tell us what happened. The silence in that room was deafening. 45 people staring at me, trying to process what I just told them. I owned 800 acres. I owned their lake. I owned most of their neighborhood. And I owned the land where Victoria had been running her $1 million fraud operation. You could literally see the wheels turning in people's heads as they realized what this meant. Some looked scared, probably wondering if I was going to evict them. Others looked relieved, like they finally understood why Victoria's claims had never made sense. But Victoria looked like she was about to have a heart attack. "That's impossible!" she shrieked, jumping up from her chair. "Those documents are fake. I've been developing this area for years. I know the law." But I was ready for her reaction. I pulled out the official county verification documents, the genealogy expert's report, and copies of the original 1847 deed. "Victoria," I said, "according to the county records office, the Thompson family property was never legally subdivided. It was divided for tax purposes to make the bills manageable, but the original deed remained intact. That's why the property boundaries have always been confusing, because legally, it's still one massive piece of land." I spread the documents out on the table, and people started crowding around to see them. The original property map was incredible. It showed the entire lake, the surrounding forest, and most of what was now the residential community. Victoria's breakdown was spectacular to watch. She went through all the classic stages: denial, anger, bargaining, and finally just pure panic. "This is a conspiracy," she screamed. "You're all trying to destroy me. I built this community. I deserve respect." She was pointing at everyone in the room, her voice getting higher and more hysterical with each word. "I've been working with developers. I have contracts. I have rights." But Gary, bless him, stood up and delivered the final blow. "Victoria, you don't have any right to sell. You never did. You've been committing fraud, and now everyone knows it." The look on her face when she realized that her $1 million development deal was worthless was almost sad, almost. That's when the small local developer showed up. And let me tell you, he was not happy. This guy had put down $100,000 based on Victoria's promises of exclusive lake access and development rights. When he walked into that meeting and saw the county documents proving that Victoria had been lying about everything, he lost his mind. "You promised me private lake access," he yelled at Victoria. "You said you could deliver exclusive development rights. I've got investors breathing down my neck. And now you're telling me this was all fake." Victoria tried to blame everyone else: me, Gary, the county records office, even the genealogy expert, but the damage was done. The developer was already talking about fraud charges and breach of contract lawsuits. But here's the thing that really got to me: the fear in my neighbors' eyes. These were good people who'd bought their homes in good faith, and now they were looking at me like I was some kind of feudal lord who might decide to evict them on a whim. I realized I had to address their concerns immediately. "Look, everyone," I said, standing up and trying to project calm authority. "I want to be very clear about something. I didn't know about this inheritance when I bought my cabin. I came here for the same reason you did, to have a peaceful home near a beautiful lake. The last thing I want is to be anyone's landlord or to disrupt your lives." I could see some people relaxing, but others still looked worried. My fight is with Victoria and her fraud operation, not with any of you. The community reaction was mixed, which I completely understood. Put yourself in their shoes for a second. You wake up one morning, and some stranger drops a bombshell that turns your entire world upside down. I don't blame them for being confused, scared, or even angry. Hell, if I were them, I'd probably be wondering if this Marcus guy was just another scammer trying to pull a fast one. Trust is a fragile thing, and Victoria had shattered it for everyone. Some people were angry that they'd been lied to about the exclusive lake access they'd paid premium prices for. Others were worried about their property values and what this revelation meant for their investments. A few residents were actually relieved because they'd never liked Victoria's authoritarian approach to community management anyway. But everyone wanted to know the same thing. What was I going to do with 800 acres of land and the power to control an entire community? It was the biggest decision I'd ever faced, and I honestly didn't know the answer. Gary stepped up and offered to help me figure out the legal implications. As a local lawyer, he understood the complexity of the situation better than anyone. Marcus, he said, you have several options here. You could assert your property rights and become a traditional landlord. You could sell the land to a developer. You could subdivide it properly and sell individual lots to the current residents. Or, he paused, looking thoughtful, you could donate the land to the county for public use. That would preserve the community while ensuring that no one else can pull a Victoria-style fraud operation in the future. The idea of donating the land was intriguing, but it was also terrifying. We're talking about millions of dollars in potential value. Meanwhile, Victoria was making increasingly desperate moves. She tried to destroy evidence by shredding documents in her office. She attempted to declare bankruptcy to avoid the fraud charges. She even tried to convince the developer that I was the one committing fraud, claiming that my documents were forgeries designed to steal her legitimate development project. But it was too late. The county had already opened an investigation into her activities, and the state attorney general's office was reviewing the evidence for potential criminal charges. Victoria's house of cards was collapsing, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The really tragic part was watching someone dig themselves deeper and deeper into a hole. Victoria had convinced herself that she was the victim in all of this, that everyone was conspiring against her success. She couldn't accept that she'd been committing fraud, that she'd been lying to people and stealing their money, even when faced with undeniable evidence. She continued to insist that she was right and everyone else was wrong. It was like watching someone choose to live in a fantasy world rather than face reality. But reality has a way of catching up with people, and Victoria's reality was about to come crashing down. The sheriff arrived the next morning with a warrant for Victoria's arrest. Real estate fraud, theft by deception, and conspiracy charges. I watched from my cabin window as they led her away in handcuffs. Still screaming about conspiracies and fake documents, the woman who'd called 911 on me for phishing was being arrested on land that I actually owned. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. But as satisfying as it was to see justice served, I still had the biggest decision of my life to make. What would you do with 800 acres and the power to change everything? The morning Victoria got arrested was surreal. I'm drinking my coffee and watching the sunrise over the lake. My lake, I still couldn't get used to that. When I see the sheriff's cars pulling up to her house, 3 police vehicles, lights flashing, and a crowd of neighbors gathering to watch the show. Victoria came out screaming, of course, because that woman couldn't do anything quietly. This is harassment. This is a conspiracy. I'm being targeted for protecting property values. But the charges were serious. Multiple counts of fraud, theft by deception, and conspiracy. 6 families had been cheated out of a total of $150,000, and that was just what they could prove. The prosecutor told me later that some victims might never get their money back, because Victoria had already spent most of it on her lifestyle and legal fees. The civil lawsuits started piling up immediately. The developer sued Victoria for $500,000 in breach of contract damages. The families who'd paid premium prices for fake exclusive lake access filed a class action lawsuit. Even the Homeowners Association sued her for abuse of authority and misrepresentation. The problem was Victoria's assets could only cover about 60% of the total damages. Her house, her car, her bank accounts, even if they liquidated everything, there wasn't enough money to make everyone whole. Some of those families were going to eat the loss, and that really bothered me. These were good people who trusted the wrong person and paid the price for it. But the criminal case was moving forward, and that's what really mattered. The state prosecutor was taking this seriously because Victoria's fraud operation had been so systematic and well-documented. She'd created fake contracts, made false promises to multiple parties, and used her position as HOA president to legitimize her scam. The evidence was overwhelming: recorded conversations, forged documents, bank records showing where the money went. Victoria's defense strategy seemed to be denying everything and claiming she was the victim of a vast conspiracy, which wasn't exactly compelling to a jury. Meanwhile, I was dealing with the aftermath of my own revelation. The media had picked up the story, and suddenly I was the guy who discovered he owned 800 acres while trying to fish in peace. Local news stations were calling me for interviews, and the story was spreading on social media with headlines like, "Man discovers he owns entire lake while fighting HOA Karen." It was flattering in a way, but also overwhelming. I'd moved to this cabin to escape attention, and now I was the center of a viral story about property rights and HOA abuse. The irony wasn't lost on me. The hardest part was the decision I had to make about the land. For weeks, I couldn't sleep, walking around the property at night and trying to figure out what the right thing to do was. I could become rich overnight by selling to developers or by asserting my rights as a landlord. 800 acres in a desirable lakefront location could be worth millions, but every time I thought about that option, I remembered why I'd moved here in the first place. I wanted peace, not the responsibility of being a landlord to dozens of families. I wanted to fish and work on my woodworking hobby, not manage a real estate empire. Gary became my unofficial advisor during this period, helping me understand the legal options and the implications of each choice. His wife's cancer treatment was going well, and he was incredibly grateful that I'd helped him avoid getting caught up in Victoria's fraud scheme. "Marcus," he said one evening as we sat by the lake, "you have a chance to do something really special here. You could set a precedent for how communities should actually work." That's when he explained the idea of donating the land to the county for public use. It would preserve the community exactly as it was, ensure that the lake remained accessible to everyone, and prevent any future Victoria-style fraud operations. Plus, the tax benefits would be substantial. The more I thought about it, the more the donation idea made sense. I'd get significant tax savings, about $30,000 per year, while ensuring that no one would have to worry about being evicted or manipulated by power-hungry HOA presidents. The lake would become a public recreation area, open to everyone forever. The community would be preserved, and I'd still have my cabin and my peaceful retirement. It felt like the right thing to do, but it was also terrifying to give up that much potential wealth. We're talking about millions of dollars that I was considering just giving away. Victoria's sentencing hearing was scheduled for a month after her arrest, and I decided to attend. I wanted to see justice served, but I also wanted to understand how someone could go so far down the wrong path. The courtroom was packed with her victims, families who'd lost their savings, the developer who'd been scammed, and community members who'd been manipulated and lied to. Victoria showed up in an orange jumpsuit, looking smaller and more defeated than I'd ever seen her. But when it came time for her to speak, she still couldn't accept responsibility. "I was just protecting property values," she told the judge. "I built this community from nothing. I deserve respect, not persecution." The judge wasn't buying it. "Miss Hayes, you systematically defrauded multiple families and businesses. You abused a position of trust for personal gain. You showed no remorse and continued to lie even after being caught." 3 years in state prison, plus restitution of $400,000, money that Victoria would probably never be able to fully repay. As they led her away, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, but at what cost? Multiple families had lost money they couldn't afford to lose. A community had been torn apart by lies and manipulation, and one woman had destroyed her entire life through greed and poor choices. But 3 years in prison can change a person. The question is, has it changed Victoria? Prison either breaks people or transforms them. What do you think happens to someone who loses everything they built through their own greed? 3 years later, I'm sitting in the same courtroom, but this time it's for Victoria's parole hearing. The woman who walks in looks nothing like the screaming, entitled HOA president I dealt with years ago. Prison had aged her, humbled her, and apparently given her time to think about what she'd done. She'd been working in the prison laundry, attending counseling sessions, and slowly paying back what she could to her victims. When the parole board asked her about her crimes, she didn't make excuses or blame anyone else. "I was wrong," she said simply. "I let greed and power corrupt me. I hurt good people who trusted me. And I have to live with that for the rest of my life." But I wasn't there to support her parole. I was there to represent the community that was still healing from her fraud. "Your Honor," I told the parole board, "while I appreciate that Miss Hayes may have changed, the damage she caused is still being felt. Some of her victims never got their money back. Some had to sell their homes because of the financial strain. The community is stronger now, but we're still dealing with the consequences of her actions." The parole board listened carefully, but ultimately decided that Victoria had shown genuine remorse and had been a model prisoner. She was released after serving 2.5 years of her 3-year sentence. Meanwhile, I'd made my decision about the land, and it was the best choice I've ever made. I donated all 800 acres to the county. Creating the Thompson Lake Public Recreation Area, the tax benefits were substantial. I saved about $30,000 per year, but more importantly, I'd preserved the community and ensured that the lake would remain accessible to everyone forever. The donation ceremony was incredible. Hundreds of people showed up, including families from all over the county, who'd been coming to the lake for generations. The county commissioner called it one of the most generous acts of public service in our region's history. Gary had become the new HOA president, and he'd transformed the organization into a model of transparency and accountability. All meetings were public, all financial records were open to residents, and all decisions required proper notice and genuine community input. He'd learned from his mistake with Victoria, and he was determined to make sure that no one could ever manipulate the system again. His wife's cancer treatment had been successful, and their marriage was stronger than ever. "I learned that money isn't worth compromising your integrity," he told me one evening as we fished together. "You saved me from making a terrible mistake." The community transformation was remarkable. Property values had actually increased after Victoria's arrest because people wanted to live in a place with honest leadership and genuine community spirit. The lake became a popular destination for families throughout the county, and local businesses thrived from the increased tourism. Every year, we held Thompson Lake Day, a community festival that drew thousands of visitors. I received a County Medal of Honor for my extraordinary service to the public good. But honestly, the real reward was seeing kids playing on the same lake, where Victoria had once tried to ban fishing. Victoria's life after prison was a study in consequences. She couldn't work in real estate anymore due to her criminal record, so she took a job at a retail store, slowly paying back what she could to her victims. She'd lost her house, her car, her savings, and her reputation. But she'd also gained something that she'd never had before: self-awareness. She occasionally visited the lake on weekends, sitting quietly on a bench and watching families enjoy the water. I saw her there once, and she gave me a small wave. I nodded back. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was recognition that people can change. The legal precedent from our case became a model for other communities dealing with HOA abuse. Gary started a legal practice specializing in property rights and HOA reform, helping other residents fight back against corrupt leadership. He'd speak at conferences and workshops, telling our story and teaching people how to recognize and prevent the kind of fraud that Victoria had perpetrated. The key, he'd always say, is transparency. When everything is done in the open, it's much harder for bad actors to manipulate the system. But the real success story was the community itself. We'd survived a crisis that could have torn us apart, and we'd emerged stronger and more unified than ever. The lake that Victoria had tried to control was now a place where everyone was welcome. The neighborhood that she'd tried to manipulate was now a model of democratic governance, and the people she'd tried to exploit were now advocates for transparency and accountability. It was proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply doing the right thing. 5 years after Victoria's arrest, I achieved exactly what I'd set out to do when I bought that cabin. I wake up every morning, make coffee, and fish in peace. My woodworking hobby has turned into a small business, and I'm genuinely happy. The lake is always busy with families and visitors, but that just makes it more alive and vibrant. I'd rather share this beautiful place with everyone than keep it to myself. Sometimes the best power is the power you give away. This story started with a simple 911 call and ended with a man owning 800 acres. Echo Stories viewers, what's the wildest plot twist that ever happened in your real life? 5 years have passed since Victoria's arrest, and Thompson Lake has become everything I dreamed it could be when I first bought my cabin. Every morning, I wake up to the sound of families setting up for a day of fishing, kids laughing as they jump off the dock, and the gentle splash of canoes and kayaks exploring the shoreline. The lake that one woman tried to control for her own profit is now a place where everyone feels welcome. I'm sitting on my deck right now, watching a father teach his daughter how to cast a fishing line. And I'm reminded of why I made the decision to give this land to the public. Some things are too beautiful to own. The community has thrived in ways I never expected. Thompson Lake Day has become the biggest annual festival in the county, drawing thousands of visitors who come for the fishing tournaments, craft fairs, and live music. Local businesses have flourished because of the increased tourism, and the economic impact has been incredible. But more importantly, we've created a culture of transparency and accountability that has spread to other communities. Gary's legal practice specializes in helping neighborhoods fight HOA abuse, and he's become a nationally recognized expert on property rights and community governance. His wife's cancer has been in remission for 4 years now, and they're more in love than ever. Victoria's story took a surprising turn about 3 years after her release. She'd been working at a retail store, living in a small apartment, and slowly paying back what she could to her victims. But then she started volunteering at the community center, helping with literacy programs and food drives. At first, people were skeptical. Was this another manipulation, another scheme? But over time, her actions spoke louder than her words. She never asked for recognition or tried to rehabilitate her image. She just quietly helped people. And slowly, some members of the community began to forgive her. Not everyone, and not completely, but enough to show that redemption is possible for people who genuinely change. The legal impact of our case has been significant. The Thompson Lake precedent is now cited in property law textbooks as an example of how historical deed research can resolve modern disputes. Law schools use our story to teach about fraud prevention and the importance of due diligence in real estate transactions. The genealogy expert who helped me verify my inheritance has become something of a celebrity in her field, appearing on documentaries about property rights and historical land ownership. She always jokes that she's never seen a case where an old map fragment led to someone owning 800 acres, but she's proud of the role she played in exposing Victoria's fraud. But the real success story is what happened to the victims of Victoria's scam. While some never got their full money back, the community came together to help them in other ways. We organized fundraisers, provided legal assistance, and created support networks for families who'd been hurt by the fraud. The developer who'd been scammed ended up partnering with the county on legitimate projects that benefited the entire region. Gary helped several families restructure their mortgages and find financial relief. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was community justice. People taking care of each other when the system fell short. My own life has found the perfect balance between solitude and community. I still live in the same cabin, still fish every morning, and still work on my woodworking projects in the afternoon. But now, I'm also involved in the community in ways I never expected. I teach property rights workshops, help resolve neighbor disputes, and serve on the County Parks Commission. I found that having given away my accidental wealth, I'm richer than I ever was as a corporate lawyer. The satisfaction of seeing families enjoy the lake, knowing that I helped preserve it for future generations, is worth more than any bank account. Victoria and I have never had a direct conversation about what happened, but we've acknowledged each other in small ways over the years. She still visits the lake occasionally, usually sitting alone on a bench and watching the activity around her. Sometimes I see her feeding ducks or picking up litter that visitors have left behind. It's a strange kind of closure, not the dramatic confrontation you might expect, but a quiet understanding that we've both moved on from who we were during that conflict. She's paying for her crimes, and I'm enjoying the peace I always wanted. The kids in the neighborhood love hearing the story of how their lake was saved from the mean lady who tried to take it away. They don't understand all the legal complexities, but they grasp the basic moral of the story. Sometimes doing the right thing is more important than making money. Last week, a group of 10-year-olds asked me to tell them the Karen story again. And as I watched their faces light up when I got to the part about discovering I owned 800 acres, I realized that this tale has become part of the local folklore. It's a story about standing up to bullies, about communities coming together, and about the power of doing what's right even when it's not easy. Looking back, I can't imagine how different my life would have been if I had made different choices. What if I had decided to be a landlord and collected rent from all my neighbors? What if I'd sold the land to developers and walked away with millions? What if I'd let Victoria intimidate me into giving up my fishing rights? Every decision led to this moment, sitting by a lake full of happy families, knowing that I played a small part in preserving something beautiful for future generations. Sometimes the best revenge really is just being right. And sometimes the greatest wealth is the wealth you give away. The sun is setting over Thompson Lake as I finish this story, and I can see Victoria sitting on her usual bench about 100 yards away. She's watching a family pack up their fishing gear after a successful day on the water. Tomorrow morning, I'll wake up, make my coffee, and cast my line into the same water where this whole adventure started. But now, instead of fishing in solitude, I'll be sharing the lake with everyone who wants to enjoy it. And that, I think, is exactly how it should be. And that's how a 911 call about fishing led to me discovering I owned 800 acres of county land, and learning that giving it away was the richest thing I could do. The lesson here, sometimes the people who scream the loudest about their authority are the ones who have the least. Don't let bullies intimidate you because you never know what cards you're actually holding. Here at Echo Stories, we believe that standing up for what's right always pays off in the end. If this story reminded you that karma is real, smash that like button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.